Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to Curation Policies for Free Expression, a session that was presented at Winter Institute 2026 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hey friends, is this volume okay? All right, great. We're going to start in a second. I realized I say hey friends at this point. I feel like I do know many, if not most of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Philomena Polefrone. I'm the Associate Director of Advocacy, Public Policy, and American Booksellers for Free Expression at ABA. And if you've been to my sessions before, they've usually been pretty harrowing. You know, I don't exactly pride myself on that. This one is going to be a little bit more prosaic, but also a little bit more focused on things that you can do right now to be ready for things that might happen in your store. Put another way, it's going to be focused on policy. We'll talk about bookstore policies, 4 policies in particular: mission statements, value statements, curation policies, and codes of conduct. What each of those means, how to use them, and just some different approaches to each of those. Before we get into all that, I wanna drop some resources. And actually, this is the first time I've dropped these resources. So we're soft launching a new toolkit. This is going to be based on the previous sessions that I've done about navigating harassment in your store, threats, intimidation. It's some resources that you might have seen before. It's some new resources, but it's all packaged together in a set of checklists that you can go through and say, have I done everything I can to make sure that we're ready? So it's going to dovetail with this session on policy, and you'll be seeing a lot more about it in BTW and on ABFE social media and elsewhere in the coming weeks. So go ahead and take that. I'll put the QR code up again at the end. And again, you'll have plenty more chances to check that out. But for today, I'll just remind you that the resources from this session are available on BookWeb. This will be audio recorded for our podcast and audio recording booked. Would love it if you could respond to the survey about this session, just so I can make sure that future sessions are on point and figure out what you like and what you don't like. And finally, the slides and some handouts and stuff will be available through the app. But really, I would say the main resource that I'll come back to that. Okay, well, there's also going to be something on BookWeb that is this presentation is very closely based on, that you can just go through and follow along more closely at your leisure when you're in more of a space to actually work with your team and develop your policies. First, as always, it wouldn't be an ABA session if we didn't go through some antitrust guidelines. Booksellers are encouraged to share ideas and support during the conference. Absolutely you are. But the Sherman Antitrust Act, which doesn't sound like it, but the Sherman Antitrust Act is our friend, prohibits us from discussing price or pricing policies, boycotts, dividing up the market. And if you have questions about this, we can talk. You can go to ABA's full antitrust guidelines on BookWeb. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. We're talking about policies. You can't have a policy for everything that might come up in your store, right? As I can never remember these guys' names. Charlie probably is illustrating here. And this is the one GIF I've allowed myself, so please enjoy it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about what I mean when I say policy, why you would want to have policies established, and different approaches to the 4 policies I mentioned: mission statements, value statements, curation policies, and codes of conduct. We're going to do a little bit of brainstorming, how you would approach these policies for your own store, where you think that you might need to refresh some things. And I'll ask you to kind of chat through these with some folks next to you if we have time, because I think the different approaches to these are as instructive as anything. We'll close with applying policy, because a policy isn't good if nobody knows what it is and if nobody has been trained on it. And then we'll close with some of the resources that I've mentioned so far. I do want to share this other This is the BookWeb resource I discussed that is basically a version of this session on BookWeb that you can go through more slowly and more deliberately. I'll put that QR code up again at the end. Okay, so I'm talking a lot about policy, but I haven't said what it means. I want to emphasize that this is a written set of guidelines. It's extremely important that it be written. If you have a policy in your head, especially if you have a team, and if you've told it orally to people, you don't know if they're paying attention. You need to have it written so that people can refer to it when they need it. It could be guidelines for management of the store, for yourself, even if you're the owner of your store. It can be guidelines for staff when you're training them or when they need that information. And in the case in particular of a code of conduct, it can be a guideline for customers to know how your bookstore operates and what is and is not okay in your space or at your events. ABA has all of these policies. A code of conduct is something that you all have had to engage with and think about on your way into this conference. Same thing for your bookstore, right? I'll refer to this at various points as a social contract, which I think is one thing that a policy can really explain. But it can also be a set of rules. This is okay and this is not okay, whether for your staff or for customers, or especially if it's a policy that you're using to kind of keep yourself focused and honest. It can be a set of guiding principles. How do you decide, given the infinite possibility of books you could stock and the very finite shelves that you have available, how do you decide what to focus on? How do you decide if someone wants to special order a book that is way outside of your focus and maybe outside of your comfort level? How do you decide if that's something that you want to take on as a store? How do you decide how you approach your own personal values and how those relate to the values of the space that you want to create? These are all things that you can think through ahead of time when you're not under pressure, so that when you are under pressure, you're ready. So I've said some of this already, but why you would want it, again, to think about it before you need it. But also, especially if you have a larger team, to coordinate decision-making. Especially if it's about book ordering or curation or handling special orders or different people who are making judgment calls in the middle of events. These are all things that you want to have people singing from the same hymn sheet. You need the hymn sheet. And finally, the last reason, and this is one that I think people don't necessarily think about all the time in terms of management or if you own your store, when you have a policy for what you carry or don't carry or order or don't order, and you have language that you're giving staff, that actually shields them. So we've seen a lot of situations, which you might have heard me talk about before, where someone comes in and kind of starts a confrontation with a staff member they perceive to be more or less experienced, and they kind of bait them into saying something that maybe they would want back. But lo and behold, it's been recorded. It's been put on someone's Rage Bait YouTube site that they've monetized, and sometimes that staff member ends up getting harassed, doxxed, threatened, all sorts of things you want to avoid. Helping people have the language they need to engage in those situations is another really useful thing that a set of policies can do, particularly if folks have been trained on those policies. So again, these are the 4 policies we're going to cover. We can also reframe them as questions. The mission statement is a way of answering what is your purpose as a bookstore. A value statement is a way of saying what is important to you. A curation policy is a way of saying what are the boundaries of your shelves, but also what do your shelves seek to do. And that goes for event curation as well. And the code of conduct is, what is your social contract? What does everyone who's entering your space need to do so that the space can be what you want it to be? And that applies to you as if you're owners and management. It applies to you if you're staff, and it applies to your customers and community members coming into the space. So let's talk about a mission statement. What is your purpose? I'm not getting existential. I promised I no longer do that before 10 a.m. You might think if of a mission statement like, okay, my mission's to sell books. This is a bookseller conference. Do you know where you are, Philomena? Yes, I know. We're all here to sell books. But even the most general interest bookstores has a mission. So think about what else can you say in addition to selling books. And I don't mean what are your sidelines, what other kinds of events do you have? I mean, how do you make decisions about your limited shelf capacity and what you want to stock and what you want to focus on? What is your identity as a bookstore? What kind of space do you want to create for your community? These are all things that can go into a mission statement. And that's true even if you don't think of your store as mission driven. And the mission statement is not necessarily going to be where you came from or who you are, right? Sometimes that often leads into it, but that's who you are. A mission statement is what you do and why. So I want to break this down into some three broad types that you might have heard me refer to before in some of my other talks. Many of you might be coming from what you would think of as a generalist bookstore, a general interest bookstore, offering a wide range of books across genres. In that case, the mission statement might be about how much are you driven by community interest versus your own sort of selections and taste. How do you mediate between those two things? How much are you focused on new releases versus classics? What is your children's section like? Are there other sections that you really want to make sure you emphasize? Maybe you're poetry lovers, and it's important to you to have a robust poetry section in your store, regardless of sales and regardless of everything else. Maybe you're a specialist bookstore. So that could mean subject matter. We're seeing such an amazing boom of romance bookstores, genre bookstores of other kinds. But it could also be, are you focused on queer books? Are you focused on books by immigrants? Are you focused on, books that have some other element that unites them? These are all things that you might want to highlight. And that could include, by the way, like if you have really interesting shelving practices, like there's a store, I think maybe in Madison, Wisconsin, I'm blanking on the name right now, bad form, I know, where they shelve according to like region, and they have wine pairings with those regions, right? So there are things like that if that's really central to what you want to do, or, McNally Jackson in New York, right? They have their kind of regional shelving for fiction. There are things like that you could, if it's really central to who you are, bring it into the policy. And then finally, I really want to make space and make sure to mention the activist bookstore driven by a social mission. So sometimes that'll define you. Sometimes it'll be a way that you approach certain things within your general interest bookstore mission. But that could be about representation of identities. It could be about supporting a certain political cause or political position, or, even creating space for a local community to gather. That's also a mission, right? That's also an activist mission. What does it mean for you? What kind of space do you want to create and why? So I have some examples here. For the sake of time, we're not going to linger on them. And I did add these kind of late. So I basically just grabbed policies from people who I didn't think would be too mad at me that I'm asking forgiveness rather than permission. I see someone from Greenlight here. Sorry, grab yours. Buffalo Street Books. Lisa did give me permission. But these are both different approaches, right? And these are both absolutely general interest bookstores. But they're also articulating a mission that is really about mediating between their space and the community. And in Buffalo Street Books, it's also talking about their role as a nonprofit and how that impacts their mission. So when the slides are available, you can go back through those and see, sit with those with more time. For specialist bookstores, again, I don't think Charlie will get too mad at me. I don't see him here, but don't tell. This is a way of framing a queer bookstore's mission, right? It is about community connection, but what's the community? It's specifically the queer community in the area, championing queer voices and bringing people into that space. But there's also, specialist can mean genre. Meet Cute, great romance bookstore in California. Their identity is part of their mission, but it's also about, books they consider romance adjacent, which they say is based on vibes, right? These do not need to be contracts. They can be fun. They can be, also a kind of illustration of who you are. In terms of activist bookstores, Loudmouth Books, so amazing. There are a ton of great banned bookstores that are popping up. This one is this. If you've met Leah, I hope that you have, because Leah's incredible. Her mission statement is so much in her voice, and it's also so rooted in her mission. And Firestorm in Asheville, North Carolina, as a queer feminist collective, what it means to represent marginalized communities in the South in particular, that's central to their mission. So thinking about where you are and how your mission relates to your location, that's also part of, I think, how you can approach this. Okay, so a value statement I'm not going to linger on, because for a lot of people, the value statement and the mission statement might go together. But this is a way of separating out what's not just what do you do, but what's important to you. What are the principles underlying your mission? If you're trying to represent your community, if you're trying to meet people where they are in terms of what they want, why? What is it that leads you to that? When you could do anything with your store, why is that the thing? So as I said, I've referred to this as a North Star. That can really help you if you're trying to figure out whether something is in mission or out. Having a value statement to check yourself with and point yourself back to can be really helpful. And this might be something that is explicit. This might also not be one that you ultimately decide to write or that you ultimately don't decide to share publicly. It can be implicit. But I think if you're a store with a staff, I think that it's worth having that conversation with everybody in the store to sort of, even if it's not going to be a communal decision, I think having the conversation can help you know where there might be points of tension. And so if there's some kind of event curation or something like that is going to end up causing some conflict in the store, it's worth knowing that ahead of time and having a chance to have a conversation when tensions are relatively muted, when heads are relatively cool. When you're approaching the value statement, it's not only going to be political values, though that's probably what people think of first. It's also the community values that I talked about. What is your role, the role of your store in the community, but also literary values. This might be impact how you approach how much, how many new releases versus classics you have, different sections that you hold space for, maybe because you think they've been undervalued, or because it's just, as we all saw in Ms. Janet's part of the keynote yesterday morning, it's what you like, right? Like, that's enough. And I want to address this question about value statements, because some of you might be thinking, like, having a value statement on your website, it feels kind of performative. I'm not sure how that's going to go over. It feels a little icky. Performative allyship is a term that folks are critiqued with when their statement of values doesn't match what they're doing. And it's worth thinking about that seriously, right? If you're putting the queer liberation flag in your store and you're saying you're a safe space, what does it mean to be a safe space? What does that commit you to? If you're having a value statement that is about supporting immigrant communities, what does that mean right now, right? So coming to some sense to your own satisfaction of what it means to actually walk the walk before you talk the talk, that's not a reason not to have a value statement. I think that's actually the reason to go through that process for yourself, right? To really think about the practice of your store. And if you're doing that work, if you've done that work, and if you're continually doing that work, then I think having that value statement is something that is justified. It's also a way of keeping yourself honest, keeping yourself to that work. Pause. Those are the first two that I feel like you're most likely to have, right? Some of those parts, maybe you're thinking like, okay, we have our mission statement. It's pretty locked in. There are 1,000 other examples I could have grabbed. The next two, these are the ones where I think it's really important to kind of review what you have to make sure that if you have a policy for curation or for code of conduct, that it's matching your existing, what you're actually doing in practice, to make sure that it's as updated as it could be for a particular moment. Because especially in terms of code of conduct, like, We are in such a heated political moment. If any of you were in the Democracy Security Project session yesterday, or the de-escalation session, there are all these strategies that we really wish we didn't need to have, right? But going through these policies and making sure they're meeting the moment, that's another reason to just kind of think through it again, even if you already have it in place. So a curation policy, again, it's the boundaries of your shelves, but it's also what are you seeking to do in your book curation and your curation of events. When you could select anything, why do you select what you do? If you've heard me talk about this before, it's probably in the context of how helpful it is to have a curation policy if someone is complaining about things that you have on your shelves, or asking, as has become increasingly common, why don't you have 75 copies of this book that I want on stock at all times? And it's like, well, because it's 8 years old and we don't have 75 copies of anything, but people don't want to hear that. Or if people are saying, we don't like that you have this event, I find it offensive and I don't know why you would platform this person. You want to have an answer for that, right? Even if it doesn't satisfy them, you want to know what that answer is. And having a curation policy as enables you to say, well, this is how we make those choices. And whether it's publicly available or not, it's something that you can point to and use people to guide your own response. I also want to emphasize here that just as you have a right to choose what you sell, you have a right to choose what you don't want to sell, what's not in your mission. You have to make choices. That's what curation means. Increasingly, I'm seeing really, really aggressive both sidesism targeting bookstores, which is to say, if you're going to carry this book, you also have to carry this book. No, you don't. That's your choice. That's literally the job, right? To make those choices. And that's some place where I think that's a place where people confuse bookstores and libraries sometimes. Libraries have different obligations. Bookstores get to specialize, and that can be specialized in terms of their own perspective. It can also be specialized in terms of genre or something like that. You're not going to go into a romance bookstore necessarily and say that they should be carrying 3 to 5 Tom Clancy novels, unless Tom Clancy is doing something new these days. I don't think so. And then finally, again, this is a place where you can train staff, even if they're not involved in the book buying. Having them know what that policy is going to help them sort of figure out how to respond if somebody is asking them those questions, because people will sometimes target someone who seems new or seems inexperienced to ask those questions, especially if they're trying to bait them. And finally, I'm going to say this a few more times before the end. A policy nobody knows about is useless. This is something that has come up in a few other sessions. You can have a policy for your 10-person staff, and if you have just mentioned that there is a policy and they should read it, that's probably the same as them not knowing what it is. Have that conversation. Figure out some way to make sure that people have reviewed it. Maybe sometimes people will have new hires sign off on a policy that they've read, which will sometimes just make people pause and make sure that they actually have, especially when they're starting a new job. But if you have the capacity, using these policies to train staff and to calibrate those responses and to have the conversations that might reveal something you didn't think of, that process can be extremely useful as well. A caveat here, I was having this conversation with Carolyn yesterday after the Democracy Security Project. It can be really hard to figure out how often to do these trainings, particularly if there's turnover in the store. You can't necessarily do a full training with every new person who's coming in. Keep that in mind when you're assigning roles, what you have trained people for, and how important that policy is to you in terms of the particular role that you have someone doing. So when you're doing a curation policy, this is a place where I think, I'll pause here and say, when I first started conceiving this session, I was thinking of it as just the curation policy. But what I realized as I was starting to write it out is that these 4 policies that I'm talking about are so inherently connected that I didn't think you could just do one. And this is the part where I think I can explain why, because you can't talk about your curation policy without thinking about how it is an expression of your store's mission and how it's an expression of your store's values, particularly on those edge cases where maybe there's disagreement between, like, on the team, or just a kind of internal debate about, like, is this in our mission? I don't really want to carry this book, but if I'm dispassionately applying the store's mission, should I? Right? Those are the places, I think, where having these policies all kind of supporting each other can be really helpful. If you are primarily driven by a social mission, I wake up every day, remember that we, live under our particular version of capitalism, and I go, right? And you probably have to do that too, especially if you're a socially driven store. Thinking about how do you balance the mission with sales, right? What are your red lines, places that you won't go in pursuit of sales? But then similarly, how do you just make sure that you're able to pay the bills and include that in part of your mission and in part of your curation? All of that, it doesn't always feel great, especially for the mission-driven stores, but it's important. It's how you stick around. And then finally, think about when you're curating books on your shelves versus events. How are those policies the same? Are they different? Do you have a different set of standards in terms of what you're okay with stocking, but you're not necessarily going to want to bring that content into the community in the same way? People might have different lines that they draw for different types of curation. There's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. I wouldn't recommend a single curation policy for every single store. I think that's a recipe for homogeneity and boredom of you and your customers. I think that the competitive advantage of indies actually is difference. And that's one of the things that is so evident every time I come to an institute. So think about what's right for your store. Again, let's go through a few different paradigms, and these are going to match up pretty closely with the types of stores that I was talking about before. But if you're a general interest bookstore, that doesn't necessarily dictate how you're going to approach curation, especially of controversial topics. So one common paradigm is that some general interest bookstores in particular will want to stock all sides of a major issue. To truly do that is impossible, just for space reasons. But maybe it'll be all kind of like well-represented major sides of a major issue. That if you see yourself as a mirror to society, you don't want to take sides. You want to maintain neutrality and be kind of an open forum where people can encounter things that they agree with or disagree with, and maybe read something that they're going to find offensive and that they're going to hate. And you want to be the place where they can find all of that, right? This might describe your approach. Some sample language that you might use in these cases, if that just seems to describe what you do, is that you believe in a healthy society. That a healthy society is an informed society. Every perspective has a place on our shelves. Our shelves have something to offend everyone, if you like the kind of more oppositional approach. We want to help people go beyond their echo chambers. If that's the kind of thing that you could see yourself saying in that kind of conversation, this might be for you. But each of these paradigms is going to have some benefits and it's going to have some drawbacks. In terms of benefits, this is going to key into a more traditional defense of free speech and free speech as a key civic virtue. It appeals to some First Amendment ideals, which, are really under sustained attack right now. So there's a good argument for this as a kind of appealing to free expression or free speech as a unifying principle. But there are some drawbacks too, particularly with so many issues that feel so dire and are so dire. Neutrality itself will feel to some people like a betrayal. If you are saying that anything goes, you might find that you have some red lines that you are not acknowledging. So just really think about what that means to you and how far does that anything go. The edge case that I think a lot of people will use in that case is Mein Kampf or other sorts of hate speech, right? That's going to be a red line for a lot of people. And whatever your answer is to that question, make sure that you ask it ahead of time. And then finally, community and staff might object to the perceived moral relativism, right? To not taking a stand. And you might object to it too. I don't think there's a right answer here. I think there's value in having stores that are doing both approaches, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it leads to conflict. That said, a lot of folks, because of the idea of neutrality being kind of anathema to their values, are going to go for this other paradigm where they want to reflect a specific worldview that they believe in. You'll lean into curation as an act of expression. And this is completely valid, right? Whether you think of your store as a forum for expression, whether you think of your curation as a forum for expression or as an act of expression in itself, both are protected, both are extremely valuable, both are things that indie bookstores can do in ways that even libraries might not be able to. Having a strong point of view is not a problem. I say this as someone who's had a strong point of view my entire life and has been told my entire life that it's a problem, right? It isn't. It can be a superpower, actually. Some sample language. Your curation reflects your values. It's pretty good if you have a value statement there. We uplift causes we believe in, like X, Y, and Z. We're opinionated, and that means we aren't everyone's cup of tea. That's okay. That might seem like a little extreme or uncomfortable to some folks, but like, you don't need to be everyone's bookstore, particularly if you're an activist or specialist bookstore. Again, there are benefits and drawbacks. The benefits are that right now, and really just in this moment, people often want to spend money with folks they agree with, right? Usually when there's some kind of crisis communication, it's because where a company or an institution has offended its constituents and they're really trying to walk a very fine line. The NHL is really messing it up profoundly right now, I think, or not, right? Because the NHL might just be saying this, telling everyone who they are. Probably shouldn't have said any of that, but you know what? Press, you're welcome. It's not interesting enough to report, I swear. But usually when there's some kind of crisis, like PR like that, it's because someone's customers or community are not thinking of that company as representing their values, and they're saying, what the hell? When you're reflecting a particular worldview, when you're really projecting your values and leading with them, that helps the people who do want to spend money with folks who share their values find you. Again, I think this is a really good competitive advantage that bookstores indie bookstores can do, that libraries often can't, that big box stores won't, or potentially because the values that they would express would be ones that might turn a lot of people off. And this is also just a really good way to develop your store's personality. But there are drawbacks, because even as you're drawing in people who do share your values, you're going to be pushing people away who don't. Maybe that's a benefit to you rather than a drawback. I could imagine that. But also, some people, most people, I think, aren't necessarily going to understand that difference between libraries and bookstores, or the small opinionated indie and the big identity list big box store, and are going to complain that you are doing exactly what you're trying to do. So you need to be ready to navigate those conversations when they come up. And then finally, and this is something to take seriously, especially if you're the only bookstore in the area, are you contributing to the echo chamber thing? Is there virtue in helping people encounter things that they definitely disagree with and are going to continue disagreeing with, but might want to think through, might want to understand better, even if it's just to oppose it better, right? There are reasons to help people find things that make them uncomfortable or challenge them. But again, every store is going to have a different approach to it. Then finally, let's think about activist and specialist curation together. You have a mission, whether it's to be the cutting edge of speculative fiction or whether it's to usher in the revolution, right? Like your mission is going to be expressed through your curation. That's how it comes into practice. That can be about representation of identities. It can be about offering a corrective to a lack. I talked to a great Nightlight Books, shout out if you're here. So your mission is, it's about disability justice, right? I had never heard of an indie bookstore that was focused specifically on disability justice. Maybe that's because it's new. Maybe that's just because I haven't met the other folks who are doing it yet. But that's an incredible niche that offers a service through its curation, because it can be really hard to find those books, right? So that's a place where actually the curation is the thing. And that's true for events as well. So you might say in a policy like this that you exclusively stock or emphasize books that do something or other, whatever is in line with your mission, that your store wants to be a gathering place for people who, maybe it's a particular political approach, maybe it's, as we saw in Charlie's Queer Books, their mission was, to be a gathering place to create an inclusive space through stocking queer books, or just refer directly to your mission statement. This is another place where having those statements kind of speak to each other can be a really good approach. Again, these are going to have some of the same benefits and drawbacks or similar ones to what we were just talking about. In terms of benefits, I think that the specificity of what you're focusing on can just lead to some really incredible depth. If you're if you're a Black bookstore, like maybe every bookstore in the area is going to have a copy of James, but maybe there are Black authors from indie presses who are maybe you're not going to find at your Barnes and Noble or wherever, right? And maybe you have those authors from the past 20 years, right, that people might have missed somewhere along the way. So there's really a potentially an incredible benefit at just having this specific, really well-articulated curation. Again, it just develops the identity of the store. And if you have really clear-cut guidelines, it becomes easier to navigate those complaints when someone says, I don't like what you have here on your shelf. It's like, well, did you see the sign? Because we're called Philomena's gay extravaganza. So don't come in here and complain about all the gay books we have. It just doesn't make sense. And, obviously I might not approach it that way because those situations right now can become very testy, but it's, it kind of helps. What I hear from stores over and over again is like, hey, they see the sign, they know what we do. People who don't like what we do mostly just don't come in. And the people who do. But there are drawbacks. If you're in a smaller area, having a specialist bookstore is maybe not going to be as viable as it would be in New York City or Pittsburgh or Denver, wherever. Again, maybe you start out as one thing, but you realize that you need to grow and change, maybe to just draw people in. If you're really, really going for that specialist or activist mission, change could be felt as betrayal by the people you were serving with the previous mission. And depending on your mission, it can make it really easy for trolls or other malefactors to target you, particularly, if it's in the name of the bookstore. If the name of the bookstore is speaking directly to your mission and that's controversial, it's going to be easy for you to come up in certain Google searches. So in that case, you would want to make sure that you're taking other steps to keep yourself safe. Okay. Last policy, I swear. And this one is the one that I think is maybe most important to develop right now, and when you don't need it, and is also the one that is going to be touchiest probably, which is the code of conduct. I'm describing it here as a social contract. That's kind of a abstract way of describing it. Really, it's saying, this is my space. We're a private business. I say what kind of behavior is and is not okay here. I don't think this will surprise anyone. Hopefully, we do live in a society. You have a right to insist on civil and respectful conduct, discourse, behavior in your space. That's not just true for you, that's true of everybody. Having a code of conduct sometimes will raise people's hackles in terms of like, well, I don't want to censor people. I don't want to, I don't want to boss people around. But what I want to emphasize here, that this is actually about protecting yourself. It's about protecting your team. It's about protecting like all the customers in your space and the authors and speakers who you're inviting into your space. Having that code of conduct and writing it now and thinking through it and pressure testing it, that lets you figure out, like begin to make those hard decisions in a moment of relative calm, not in the moment that you need to eject someone from the store. And if you have trained on it through some role playing with staff members and things like that, then it's going to help people figure out how to apply the policy. So here, again, think about how the values of your store and your mission, how all of that would be expressed in terms of what is and is not okay in your space. Focus on the disruption of business and disruption of events. Think about harassment of staff and guests, what constitutes it. Sexual advances, stalking, and threats are all things that you should think about, and are all things, unfortunately, that most booksellers have probably know people who have had some experience with that. And increasingly, this is becoming important. Think about unsanctioned recording and other invasions of privacy. You always really have to assume that you could be recorded in an interaction with a customer, particularly in a testy interaction with customers. Rage bait was the word of the year last year. People are trying to create rage bait and monetize it. And targeting the local radical bookstore is sometimes the way they want to do that. I wish that were hypothetical, but we've seen it. So just making the rules is not quite enough. You need to also think about, and this is part of the policy, what staff and guests should do if they witness a violation. In the examples in the version of this that's on BookWeb, you can look at ABA's policy. There's a very clear set of steps that happen if there's a violation of the code of conduct. And who is the responder to those violations? What actions do they take? How do you make sure that it's being applied fairly? Because the code of conduct in its best form would be a way that you can actually reduce the implicit bias in deciding who to eject from an event or something like that. It's a way of focusing on behavior and kind of checking any assumptions you might have about the individuals who are behaving in a certain way. Okay, so that was a lot. There's a lot more to be said about code of conduct. As I said, at the end, I'm going to put up the QR code again to the version on BookWeb that has a bunch of examples that you can link to. And to be honest, I think you should just think about what bookstores are doing something that is related to what you're trying to do. See what policies they have on their website. A lot of folks have this readily available, and for very good reason, right? Which is that in order for it to be effective, it needs to be available to staff and in some cases to customers. But let's think about putting this into practice. I want you to think about what policy your store most needs to update, or maybe the policy that they don't have that you're now thinking maybe they should have. And just start brainstorming. Take a few minutes. Think about whether it's for the mission statement, value statement, curation policy, or code of conduct, think about what would be the starting points and what you would want to make sure is in that policy. So take a few minutes, brainstorm, and then when you feel like you've gotten a few things down, start talking about it to one or two people near you. And I'll kind of come around in case there are any questions. And if you want to see any of the slides again, just let me know and I can go back. All right? Okay. I'm going to answer a few of the questions that I was, or just kind of bring in a few of the questions, if that's okay, if I bring in the things that I was talking to you two about, and you indicated it was fine if I did, just briefly, because I think they were great. One of my friends there asked, can you tell people not to record you? Yes. It's going to vary a little bit from state to state. Some states will have require both parties to consent to a recording, the person recording and the person being recorded. But for the most part, you're going to have more rights in a private space that you own than you might have in a public space. So First Amendment protections mostly are going to apply to public spaces like parks. You'll need to check in your state though, and that might be a good place if you have a lawyer friend to kind of talk through to help you navigate some of that. It's worth considering. You can have it in your code of conduct. If you are able to restrict people from recording you, you want to make sure you have that somewhere that people can see it, so that so that you can ask them to stop and they know that they're violating it. So question number 2, what did we talk about again? Can you remind me? Yes, if you have a store with multiple locations, it's a really interesting question of like, if reflecting those communities ends up meaning something different, then then it might make sense to have slightly different curation policies or mission statements, or it might not. I mean, that's a call that I think every store is going to have to make. But it's a really interesting question, right? And it's really interesting to think how you would navigate that, especially if you have like 2 locations. If you have like 10 locations, it's probably going to be harder to approach that. But even then, I think it's an interesting sort of thought exercise. Then the last question was about what does it mean? And tell me if I'm butchering this, but the question was basically, how do we create a safe space when doing so might mean or create a space that is in line with the store's mission, when doing so might feel like, to some people, like censorship, right? So we're not going to carry a book that has like really racist or upsetting imagery on the cover because we feel like that is going to make it not feel like a safe space for part of our community or something like that. Or how do maybe we don't feel like we can show up in the way we want to in our community and carry certain books, right? It's something that I know a lot of stores navigate, whatever those books are, for whatever the reasons. This is where it comes back to, are you thinking about trying to create an open forum, just be a window to whatever perspectives in your store? Or are you thinking of your curation as expression? Because curation is expression. It's protected by free expression protections. That's also part of the speech of a bookstore. So there are different ways of thinking about how you want to approach it. But 2, protecting free expression is not just about protecting what can be said. It's about protecting the forum, protecting people's ability to enter the forum on equal or at least safe footing. So if someone feels, I can't come into this bookstore, I don't feel safe coming into this bookstore because it's full of things that feel like they're assaulting me personally, right? That's not necessarily a perspective that you have to completely take on, no questions asked, but it's worth thinking about, right? It's worth thinking about what does it mean to make a forum that is open to everybody. So Robin, how much time do we have? 10:24. Okay, so pretty much none. Let me just, where did I put my little clicker thingy? I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, I just want to make sure to repeat that a policy is useless if nobody knows it. You really have to use it to train staff, and for code of conduct, it's worth making it accessible to people and referring to it and at the start of an event, particularly if you think it might become necessary. And I want to just shout out the importance of customer privacy policies right now. We've had some issues with police trying to get customer records in terms of purchase records. You can't really have free expression or free access to information if you're worried about being surveilled in that way. It's not truly free in those senses. So think about, make sure that you are requiring a subpoena or judicial warrant before handing over any private information. Make sure that your staff and team understand that. And also increasingly, and I'm hoping to make more resources about this going forward, consignment policies and how you deal with self-published books. Increasingly, that's becoming a huge sort of source of harassment, is authors who are mad that you don't want to carry their book. So I'm going to keep thinking about that and keep trying to generate resources about it. But with that, let's see if we have a few minutes for questions. I see one here, one there, and there.
Really quickly, because you just mentioned new resources for consignment. And that's something that I've been thinking about, particularly because for our store, we have a whole local author shelf and we have about 40 titles on it. And all of this discussion with AI and use of AI has been on our minds, especially because we have received some pushback about lack of resources for indie authors, lack of funding to source real artists to do cover design and all of these things. And so I was just wondering if it's possible to put in a request to help us with some language relating to AI when it comes to consignment policies and things like that. So not really a question, but maybe a question.
I will absolutely take that on board. I think it's a great idea. And again, I think it's another situation where I'm not going to tell you what decision to make, but I will try to model some different ways of approaching it when I put that together. So thank you. In the back.
Hi there. I was just hoping you could talk about special orders and how like that plays into thinking about some of these bigger ideas. Yeah, I think you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I mean, I could go on, but I think you know what I mean.
So what you are going to stock on your shelves and whether there are any limitations to what you will special order or otherwise orders that you'll fulfill on your website, particularly if you have an indie commerce site or if you have another type of approach that sort of lets people order anything in like the Ingram catalog or something, right? Those are potentially going to be two different policies, right? So you might say, well, we have limited space in our store, so here's how we make those decisions, and here's what we emphasize. Special orders, there's not that same limitation. So this is not a super satisfying answer, but I think it's just you need to decide if there are any limitations to it. And that means decide, with leadership at the store, whether your mission and values statement you think would require you to have any limitations for that. You might decide ultimately that you, like on the website, that you want to really focus on the things that you do, right? Like if you're a special interest, like genre bookstore, maybe you're kind of like, well, like I could order this thing that has nothing to do with our mission, but like I don't really want it to be on the website because that's not what we do. We're focusing on curation. So I would say just think about it as a separate policy and decide if there are any limitations. The bandana there.
Hello. I come from a very, very small bookstore. I'm under 2 owners. I'm one of 2 managers, and we have 3 other staff members. And we have they've done a lot of research on potential ICE raids and what we can do as a staff based off of the laws in our state. I kind of just want to have more insight on how to kind of empower the staff to know that they can say, these are our rights. I mean, we have all of the paperwork, but in the moment, it's always very different. So I guess I just kind of, there's always that like, well, you know, I know my rights from either side. So I guess that's my question, is making sure that they feel like they really know the policy and they feel empowered to say what they can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is where having it, not just saying, here's the policy, read the policy, but having that conversation and saying that to them, right? And sort of thinking about some scenarios where that it might be, where they might need to assert those rights, right? And how they would assert them. That's all something that, like, I really wish that more stores were doing trainings with like role playing of scenarios. I know it's awkward. I know it's cringe, but like, I'm actually not sure that there's a better way to work through those situations in advance than by creating them. But I think we might have some advice from my friend from Brookline. Sorry, could you wait for the microphone just so we get it recorded?
Sorry, I forgot the microphone was here.
I didn't tell you, so it's fine.
No, it's okay. I also wanted to recommend taking from, from like my union training. So like when you enter our union, one of the things you get is a card with your wine garden rights on it, which is your right basically to a union representative in a meeting where you feel like you might be in trouble. And what it has on there is like the direct thing that you can say to your manager. Like, I do not want to be in this meeting until I have someone present, blah, blah, blah. I think having scripts is really powerful because we all we freak out, we panic, we blank. Having like, you know, it doesn't have to be like a paragraph. It can be a couple, like a sentence or like options of sentences of whatever you want them to remember to say. You can put them up by the registers. You can put them in the back rooms or somewhere they're going to walk by all the time. So it's like just like passive intake all the time. But I think that like coming up with scripts of things can be really helpful to reference in the moment.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think thinking about who might be able to do a local Know Your Rights training that is most, relevant. It sounds like you might have already done some of that, but still. So we are out of time. I'm going to hang out, happy to talk for a while until someone tells me to get out of the room. And remember that you can find me after this at the Ask Advocacy desk, which is near the welcome table. Look for the cool banned books art raffle that ends at the end of today. Some really cool art by banned authors and illustrators. And I'm happy to talk more about this, but I'll also hang out here. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!